Hello everyone, we are on to Act 4, Scene 1 of Macbeth. The things you'll need out in front of you are probably this PowerPoint and also the appropriate Word document to go with this particular lesson, which looks something like this. There'll be a few links for you to open as well, but I'll talk you through that, so let's make a start. First thing to mention is Act 4, Scene 1. It's the start of a new act. This is when Macbeth returns to the witches. So he is the king. He has established himself as the King of Scotland. We've had the banquet scene. We've had the appearance of Banquo's ghost. He's made a bit of a fool of himself in front of his noblemen, but nevertheless he is the king. He should be secure, yet he's complaining that they have placed on his head a barren scepter and a fruitless crown. So he's enormously insecure, even though he should be the most secure at this point in the play because he's achieved his ambition. So in order to feel more secure, he decides to visit the people who gave him the information that made him the king in the first place, the witches. So let's start with a piece of terminology. This word is progeny, and it means a descendant or the descendants of a person. Now this word is going to become particularly important within this scene because we talk a lot about children within this scene, and children obviously are the progeny of an individual, and that in turn enables that person to continue some sort of legacy, some sort of line. So the progeny of Banquo is Fleance, and the progeny of Macduff is his children, but you'll notice that Macduff does not have a natural heir, which causes a problem which adds to his insecurity. So if you could write down the definition of progeny, please, the descendants of a person, in the top bit of your document. And as we're going through this scene, I want you to consider the following questions. Why does Macbeth return to the witches? Why isn't he satisfied with being the king and his lot? And why do you think it's not a good idea to go back to the witches? So hopefully you'll be able to get some answers to those questions by the end of this. Okay, so it's time to watch the scene, or the majority of the scene. I'd like you to click on the link, which will take you to the wonderful version featuring Patrick Stewart, and it will hopefully guide you,
but Grammarly can help.
You can get through the adverts,
this sentence is grammatically
to this scene here, which is of the witches as nurses. So it's a 5-minute video. Please do watch the whole of the video. You will be familiar with the start of the speech, even if you haven't studied Macbeth before, because it's a double toil and trouble speech which you will be familiar with. So pause the video here and watch this clip. Okay, welcome back. I just wanted to make a note on how the witches actually speak and how different it is to the rest of the characters within the play. Have a listen to this. Liver of blaspheming Jew, gall of goat and slips of yew, silvered in the moon's eclipse, nose of Turk and Tartar's lips, finger of a birth-strangled babe. It's very different and almost truncated in its speech when you compare it to the speech of the other characters, which tends to be longer and more eloquent. And that's because it's written in this form called trochaic tetrameter. Trochaic tetrameter is a shortened form of meter, and it's only used in this play by the witches. And it's really important to understand that the reason Shakespeare has done this is to show that the witches are different from everybody else. Most other people in the play, they speak in iambic pentameter, which, as you know, is these 10-syllable lines. And it highlights this shortened trochaic tetrameter. It serves to highlight the differences between the witches and the rest of the characters. And just to recognize what's going into this cauldron, we've got noses, we've got fingers, we've got baboon's blood. We've got incredibly disgusting things going into this cauldron to make this spell. And this is before Macbeth turns up. So this is just what the witches are doing on a day-to-day basis. You know, after watching Coronation Street, they get the cauldron out and start chucking these things in. This is absolutely appalling behavior and rather abnormal. So Shakespeare is trying to make it absolutely clear that Macbeth is seeking the advice and the wisdom of some very strange people. So, could you please fill in this part here? What's the purpose of the spell, or what's the purpose specifically of showing the witches to be talking differently from the rest of the characters? Could you pause the video here and spend a couple of minutes just putting down in note form what I've mentioned there about the trochaic tetrameter and the difference between the witches and the rest of the characters? Okay, so the rest of this lesson, you're going to be taking notes on your document. In this part here, there are a number of different apparitions that are told, or shown, I should say, to Macbeth. And I'd like you to take your time and to take the notes in the appropriate section for the appropriate apparition. So Macbeth goes to the witches and he wants to know about his future. The witches are happy to grant him some information, but in typical witch fashion, they don't tell him everything that he wants to know, and he is left up to his own to make up, to infer what they mean. The equivocation that they've used throughout the play, and it's no different within this scene. So the first apparition is an armed head, so it's a head with armor on it. Now the first thing you need to mention there that is why has it got armor on it? Well, it's essentially a suggestion that there's going to be a battle. So the witches are telling Macbeth that there is going to be a battle. Moreover, the apparition says, Macbeth, 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 beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife. Now this is as clear as can be. An armed head saying, look out, Macduff is going to get you, should be sending shivers down Macbeth's spine. And he says, whatever thou art, for thy caution, thanks. Thanks very much for letting me know. That was half my fear, all right, but one word more. He's saying, you've caught my attention, but I'd like to know a bit more. But before he gets anything else, the second apparition turns up. So, pause the video here. Could you just put some notes in here about the armed head, what it tells Macbeth, and what he and how he reacts to that first apparition? So the second apparition turns up, and the second apparition is a bloody child. Now this is slightly different from the version that you've just seen with the nurses sort of reanimating the dead bodies, but in the play it says that it's a bloody child, and this is very important because it's the first reference we have here to a child as a ghost. This is going to become quite a common theme as we go through this particular scene. The second child says, be bloody, bold and resolute. The second apparition says, be bloody, bold and resolute, laugh to scorn the power of man, for none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. Macbeth then says, then live Macduff, what need I fear of thee? So he's already forgotten the very clear message that the first apparition has given him to beware Macduff, because the second apparition has said, none of women born shall harm Macbeth. So this is particularly important because it's a bloody child. Now when we talk of progeny, children being the progeny of their parents, this child, now who does the child represent? Well, there's a couple of different interpretations here. Could it be Fleance, so the progeny of Banquo, who Macbeth is particularly scared of because the witches in Act 1 said that Banquo's children will be kings? Could it foreshadow the murder of Macduff's children, which happens in the next scene? That Macbeth is so scared of the warning that's given by the first apparition that he goes and kills the children of Macduff. Could it reference also the fact that Macbeth doesn't have any children? Lady Macbeth said that she would happily dash the brains out of a child, which suggests that she has given suck, she has had a child in the past, but doesn't anymore. So is this a reference then to Macbeth's own lack of children? And also it does reflect that, it does foreshadow that in the last scene of the play, Macduff was from his mother's womb and timely ripped. So all focuses on this idea of a child being an important part and an important fear for Macbeth. So could you pause the video here? It's the second apparition, a bloody child. Could you make your notes in this section here about what it is that the apparition is telling Macbeth and how it relates to the rest of the play? Third apparition is another child. It's another one of Macbeth's greatest fears. And it's a crowned child with a tree in his hand. So the crowned child must be Malcolm, because the crowned child is the rightful king. And although Malcolm isn't a child, he's a grown man, but this represents the rightful king. And the fact that he's carrying a branch could suggest that this is Birnam Wood, so it's foreshadowing what will happen later on in the play. But also the branch could just be a young tree, and this could reference the idea that you plant a tree and it grows, and depending on how you treat it, it can grow into something strong, or it can grow into something that can be quite dangerous. And Duncan, if you remember our face-to-face sessions in school, Duncan says to Macbeth, before he dies, "I have begun to plant thee, and will labour to make thee full of growing." Now, the suggestion here that Duncan was trying to control Macbeth by giving him the Thane of Cawdor in order to make him a powerful part of the Scottish nobility. Here we have Duncan's son, Malcolm, carrying a tree, which he's going to then use to defeat Macbeth at the end of the play. It's a really interesting piece of imagery here. It can relate to, like I said, Birnam Wood, but it could also relate to just the youth, the young, the children coming back to assuage the wrongs that have been done to their parents, which is why it's particularly terrifying for Macbeth. So go ahead. This is the third apparition here, a crowned child holding a branch. Could you make your notes in this section here now? That third apparition, that should be enough for Macbeth. The witches don't necessarily want to tell him anything else, but he forces them. He says, "Shall Banquo's issue ever reign in this kingdom?" Now, this is a problem that's been plaguing Macbeth since the start of the play, since he found out from the witches that Banquo's children will be kings. So he asks specifically, will Banquo's children reign in this kingdom? And then the witches show him a line of 8 kings. And the last one has a mirror. So essentially those 8 kings are doubled and then doubled again, and it just seems to stretch out, as Macbeth says, until the end of time. Macbeth is plagued by the idea that Banquo's children will take his throne, and that he does have this insecurity that he is really wearing a fruitless crown, that he doesn't have progeny, he doesn't have the ability to pass on his power to the next generation. So this is the really terrifying sight to him, not just one individual king, but 8 of them, and then that 8 is doubled and doubled ad infinitum, so it suggests that Banquo's line and lineage will carry on forever. And of course it's interesting because James I is a direct descendant of Banquo, so he would have been sitting there in 1605 saying, "Oh, this is very clever because I'm one of those kings on that line." This is the thing that really triggers Macbeth to go and murder Macduff's family. He does not want his power to ebb away, so he decides to go and kill Macduff's family. So go ahead in this section here, the 4th apparition. Please go ahead and fill in any notes that you have in this section now. So by the end of this scene, he's got the information that he needs. He's thoroughly worried. His insecurity and anxiety and paranoia is through the roof, and he says, "The very firstlings of my heart shall be the firstlings of my hand. Whatever I feel, I'm now going to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Macduff's castle, I'm going to surprise it, and I'm going to kill all of his family." Done here, but I'd like you to now consider these final questions and the questions I asked you to think about at the start of this. Why does Macbeth return to the witches? Let's have a quick look at this. He goes back to the witches because he wants advice, he wants approval, he wants affirmation, he wants to be soothed from his anxieties and fears, and therefore he goes back to these weird sisters because they give him a delusion of grandeur, a sense of invincibility, the idea that he can't be touched by anyone from woman born. It's almost like the witches are acting as a mother figure for Macbeth. We don't hear that Macbeth has a mother at all. So Macbeth, strangely enough, we have all these references to children. Macbeth assumes this role of a child, perhaps. The thing to do is to fill in these 3 questions yourself. Why does he return to the witches? Why isn't he satisfied with what he's got? And why do you think it's not a good idea to go back to the witches? Fill in a document, send it back to your teachers. All the best. Good luck.